Dear boss, I keep hearing the police have caught me. That joke about Leather Apron gave me real fits. I'm down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work that last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper.
The infamous Dear Boss letter, which gave Whitechapel's infamous spree killer a name, is largely thought to be a hoax, concocted by two journalists at the Star newspaper to keep a dying story alive. As with the Soho Strangler, by mangling the facts, so a mere man now morphed into a monster, their meddling had distracted the public, the rest of the press, and even the police from finding the culprit. In truth, neither killer left any clues to their identity, with no fingerprints, no witnesses, and baffled police suggesting a smattering of suspects, possibly as convenient scapegoats. With the inquests of French Fifi, Marie Cotton and Dutch Leia concluding that they were murdered by persons unknown. The cases were closed. The killer went silent, and with no news to report, a restless press moved on. But who was the Soho Strangler? A man, a myth, or a monster? A bohemian, a gay, or a Jew? And with a taste for petite French brunettes, was a fourth victim in his sights. The police thought he was a man, possibly a punter, with a past of violence against women. Whereas the press had alluded to a suspect. Described as a gangster, a ponce, a vice king, a dope peddler, a white slaver, and said to be the most feared man in the London underworld. They never gave a name to this crime boss, but as a criminal who could kill at will, exuded an aura of fear, and had the power to corrupt, making the police look away and the press pose a cunning distraction to the public. He was a real strangler in Soho. As a man, a myth, and a monster, Max Le Rocan, also known by those who dared to speak his name as Max the Red, Red Max, and Russian Max, went by many aliases. Some we know, most we don't, as he assumed new names and identities to disguise his many crimes. With his extensive criminal record listing him as Kempfesti, Kassenborg, Cassell, Emil Allard, Max Allard, and known locally as Mr Cohen. Using a multitude of aliases and forged documents in multiple countries, his true history is a mystery. Born on either the 3rd or 5th of December 1879, Meyer Cassell, known as Max, was one of at least 2 sons to Herman or Hyman and Mina Cassell, Russian Jews living in Riga, now the capital of Latvia. Being barely 5'5", but weighing in at a hefty 16 stone, Max was physically imposing. And as the police report declared, he had enormous strength and was greatly feared by those who knew him. With piercing brown eyes and fair red hair, Max the Ginger, as he was also known, exuded a real charm when he wanted to. But with his face and body a patchwork of past wounds, a broken nose, lost teeth, and his left cheek and neck slashed in a knife fight, there was no denying that Max was dangerous. barking in a gruff, menacing growl. Those who openly spoke against him stated he was a violent bully, offensive and arrogant, and a quick-tempered, selfish thug who attacked the meek with impunity, who stalked the streets unreproached, and being fast with a ligature and his fists, he often spat mocking barbs, laughing as his terrified victim was strangled into submission. No one knows when or why he left Riga, but in 1901, as a well-dressed, respectable Jewish boy with an honest trade, 20-year-old Max was running a bootmaker's in the Paris suburb of Rue Pigalle. It was a decent business, which made a little money, paid its bills, and drew no attention from the authorities. But that was the point. As using an alias, this little shoe shop was a front to hide his real income: sex. Rue Pigalle was Paris's red light district, the French Soho or Whitechapel, where cruel men like Max pimped out barely pubescent girls, selling their virginity to seedy strangers for a fee they would never see. Whether he sold her is unknown, but one girl, pimped out in Pigalle, would be later known in Soho as French Fifi. But with pimping being precarious, having been arrested on several charges of larceny, dope dealing, running a brothel, living off immoral earnings, and the assault of his girls, as he would call them, known in the trade as the Meat. In October 1903, under the alias of Kempfesti, Max was deported from France. For any honest individual, this banishment would be crippling. But by adopting a new alias, Max simply started again. From 1905, he ran a cafe in the Belgian city of Antwerp as a front for his ever-expanding stranglehold on the white slave trade. Until 1914, when he was prosecuted, but ultimately dismissed owing to a lack of evidence, and was expelled for inciting minors into debauchery. Max did not care about the meat he sold, even though, with the age of consent being just 13, some of his girls were only children. Fueled by money, power, and arrogance, Max travelled wherever he pleased, and having established a network of brothels in Buenos Aires, Antwerp, Paris, Montreal, and London, he shipped a fresh slew of pretty young girls to distant cities. As even to English punters, French girls have a taste of the exotic. Exported like cattle to a strange new land, a wonderful dream would be dangled before every girl. She would be hastily married to make deportation impossible, stripped of her passport, and then sold into the sex trade. Isolated, threatened, beaten, and living in fear, they would be indebted for life to their pimps and ponces, serving a never-ending procession of drunk and violent men, until as unloved and middle-aged spinsters with debts, criminal records, and possible addictions, they were physically and mentally spent. In 1914, Max was shipping girls between almost every continent, including Australia. Having acquired a French-Canadian passport under the alias of Emile Allard, with his cover as a West End jeweller. As with many elements of criminality, it is said but unprovable, that Max ran the Iron Gang, a feared group of pimps, extorters, and white slavers in Soho. Until 1925, when they were all charged with running a bogus marriage scheme for the purposes of prostitution. With one witness described as a prostitute and an informer, 4 men were deported, but Max was neither convicted nor charged. In 1933, 3 years before the murders, Max Cassell, alias Emile Allard, a well-dressed man in a sharp suit, a trilby hat, gold rings and cufflinks, who carried a magnifying glass as he sold jewellery, having bought it first from Debenhams, had moved into a very modest first-floor flat at 37 James Street in Marylebone, where he lived alone with his white Highland Terrier. He was so anonymous, it was almost as if he didn't exist. With his wealth hidden, his identity unknown, and his businesses seemingly legit. When the police were hunting Leia's killer, one of the reasons Red Max didn't appear on their list is that he didn't have a criminal conviction in England. As a crime boss in Soho, Max had the ability to be powerful and yet invisible. By May 1936, 3 petite brunettes of similar circumstances were strangled in their Soho flats by an unseen assailant. The police would state, "There is nothing to show that there is a connection between any of these cases. Despite the most exhaustive inquiries, no evidence was found upon which suspicion could be attached to any known person, and it is unlikely that these crimes will ever be solved." In the hunt for the killer, the police searched far and wide. And yet not once, in any of the police files, does Red Max appear as a suspect. Three streets southeast of Lexington Street, where Jean-Marie Cotton once lived. 2 streets south of Old Compton Street and Archer Street, where French Fifi and Dutch Leia plied their trades. And over Shaftesbury Avenue, in an area now called Chinatown, lived a sex worker called French Suzette. Born in Paris on an unspecified date in 1910, Suzanne Boudin came from very little and sought what was said to be a better life in England. As a pretty young brunette, with a girl-like frame, a dark bob, and rosebud lips, sex work was an obvious choice for an unskilled woman who could lure in lustful men. In 1924, at the tender age of just 14, Suzanne married Emile Bertrand, a violin maker, and together they had a daughter called Lucette. Little is known of their married life, but already working as a prostitute, it was said that Suzanne had abandoned them, fleeing to England and leaving a husband and child. Like many pieces of meat, shipped into Soho's red light district. On the 18th of March 1933, Suzanne married John Naylor, a man she had never met before, and having been paid £2 for his time. After a few months of married life, they later split. leaving Mrs. Naylor with a passport and immunity from deportation. French Suzette had many convictions for prostitution. But unlike the others, she lived in relative luxury. Many prostitutes were flat-farmed, as with the law decreeing that a brothel consisted of 2 or more prostitutes living or working in a single dwelling. The solution was simple. A series of flats, subdivided into smaller lodgings by a partition, with a bed and a hot plate installed to add an air of respectability. Just like French Fifi's flat on Archer Street, although who actually owned that house will never be known. In contrast, 35 to 36 Little Newport Street was a spacious 4-story maisonette covering 2 floors, which was furnished with artwork, soft furnishings, an electric massager, and a portable gramophone. Always dressed in fine furs, expensive cosmetics, and Parisian perfumes. Although she still had sex with men for money, her clients were exclusive, her prices were high, and her life was easier than most. Being the mistress of Roger Vernon, an infamous white slaver, and now a bitter rival of Red Max. What's most baffling about the Soho Strangler killings is the lack of motive. Every murder has a motive, whether robbery or revenge, pride or politics, insanity or mistaken identity, bloodlust or sexual urges. These murders had none of that. Each death was silent and swift. Each crime scene was untouched and clean. And each corpse, in 2 cases, were mistaken for something innocent, with layers either being personal or having not used a stocking. The flat iron only became essential to silence her. These 3 crimes could have been a coincidence, a cock-up, or controlled by someone with power. On the night of Sunday the 3rd of November 1935, French Fifi willingly invited her assailant into her Archer Street flat. And it's likely that she made him a cup of tea and maybe a plate of eggs. In the bedroom, no sex or assault took place. But in an action described by her friends as odd, she calmly removed only her left stocking, in which she kept her money, which went missing. But did he take it, or was he owed it? And having cleared her debt, did this man who felt that he owned her close her account with her death? A few weeks before her murder, her neighbour, Millicent Warren, heard Fifi argue and struggle with a foreign man in her flat, who Fifi later said got hold of my throat. Who this man was is unknown. It may seem strange for a murder to be mistaken for a suicide by such experienced detectives, a doctor and a pathologist. But it was. At the crime scene, they found no fingerprints to pinpoint to a suspect. But maybe he wore gloves. No witnesses were spotted. But possibly they were too scared to speak. By her bed were letters suggesting a suicidal depression. Or maybe this scene was staged. And with her autopsy taking 3 weeks to come to the conclusion of murder based on probability, were these professionals simply trying to get to the truth without jumping to a hasty conclusion? Or was the delay deliberate? The Daily Herald would later state, "For the police to allow such a time to elapse between the body's discovery and the cause of death being announced is almost without parallel." What we do know of the culprit is that having rendered her semi-conscious and shattered her dental plate with a single punch, that he was a big man, strong and violent, who could charm and control her. On Thursday the 16th of April 1936, the body of 43-year-old French national Jean-Marie Cotton was found strangled in her flat. Again, with no fingerprints, clues or witnesses. The police collared a gay lodger who had soiled a mattress. But with the evidence described as purely circumstantial, James Allen Hall was dismissed. The investigation described Marie Cotton as a woman of good character, and there was no evidence to suggest that at any time she'd been a prostitute. And yet she had possible links to the sex trade. Her lodger Dorothy Neary was a prostitute. She was married briefly to an Englishman, which sealed her British citizenship. She lived on a known thoroughfare occupied by sex workers. Her boyfriend Carlo reputedly paid her for sex. And it was said, just days before her death, that he had accused her of having a ponce. Marie Cotton only spoke to her closest friends about her fear of the Jew. An unidentified man who helped her out in the past, who was reclaiming a debt, whose surname she had only said once, possibly by mistake, and whose impending arrival had left her shaking with fear. On Tuesday the 14th of April 1936, just 2 days before her death, she left a note on her door which read, "Mr Cohen, shall not be long, gone to Marlborough Street, J. Lanza." That night, the mysterious Mr Cohen failed to show up. With scant information, the police stated that finding him was an impossible task. And although Mr Cohen was mentioned at the inquest, Red Max was not. Oddly, it was amidst the police's own papers that Mr Cohen was listed as a known alias for Red Max. And yet he wasn't considered a suspect in Marie Cotton's murder. But why? On Saturday the 9th of May 1936, a few streets from both murders, Dutch Lair, a 24-year-old prostitute, was found strangled and bludgeoned to death in her own bed. Again, there were no fingerprints, suspects or clues. She wasn't French, but being a small brunette, maybe some of these details are coincidental. Links between Leah and Max are as scant as you would expect. When questioned, Ruby Walker stated, "I don't know if Leah had been to France, or if someone had come from France to murder her. I knew Fifi, but I didn't know Max. I have never seen French Fifi or Leah Hines together. Even though they were both two pleasant prostitutes who had lived and worked just streets apart for the last 6 years. The links are tenuous. It's likely that Leah was flat-farmed, as her landlord had offered her another flat, having first threatened to evict her owing to non-payment of debts. It's likely that being a British prostitute, that Leah was killed for selling sex on a patch run by French ponces like Max. We know that Leah was married briefly, using aliases to Robert Smith. And in an odd connection, they held their wedding reception at number 5 Old Compton Street, the home of a French ponce, which the police file states Red Max did frequent. And yet if Max was the last man seen with Leah, and whose description, age 25 to 30, slim to medium build, fresh complexion, brown hair, long black coat and no hat, was fed to every police force in the country and led the course of the investigation, why doesn't it match Max, who was age 55, well-built, scarred complexion, with a mop of fair reddish hair, and was dressed in an expensive 3-piece suit? Was this accurate? A mistake? Or was it deception, concocted by a corrupt police force, funded by a Soho crime boss, and aided by the press, who added their own monstrous flourishes? Was the aim to ensure that these murders would never be solved, and that the Soho Strangler would never be caught? (1935 and 36) saw the swift decline of Max's once great empire, with Maltese gangs like the Messina brothers and the Vassallo gang muscling into the French-run sex trade. 55-year-old Max was far from the man he once was. Money was tight. Mr Cohen was cracking down on debtors. And 1 week before the murder, Max had his finger sliced up in a knife fight in a Berwick Street cafe over a few quid. In Britain, Max had always maintained his duality, that of a seemingly legitimate West End jeweller to hide his illicit gains, which kept him free from police suspicion and even helped him evade deportation when everyone but him in the Iron Gang was convicted back in 1925. He had no criminal conviction in this country, but following the arrest of an associate for the possession of a firearm, Max was put under surveillance and said to be a police informer in both London and Paris, that Max had handed over his associates to save his own skin. It could be a coincidence, but the Daily Herald would state French Fifi was believed to have given evidence which recently led to a sensational court case. Her real name, nor none of her aliases, appear as a witness in the reporting of that case. But then again, with this 3-month trial beginning on the 21st of November 1935, Fifi had been murdered just 2 weeks before. On Thursday the 23rd of January 1936, at about 6 p.m, Max left his modest flat at 37 James Street. With times hard and his pride dented, even his nephew would state he did not appear to have much money. In Soho, he once ruled the roost. But being overweight, old and alone, his glory days had long since gone. To compound his shame, to raise his volcanic blood pressure, and to cause his thick, hairy fists to clench whenever this debt was mentioned, 18 months earlier, he was forced to go cap in hand to get a loan of £25, £1,300 today, from a white slaver who now ruled large swathes of Soho's sex trade. This man was a French pimp called Roger Vernon. With debt being called in, Max unable to pay, and Roger spreading word that this so-called kingpin didn't have 2 halfpennies to rub together. At 6:50 p.m, he rang the doorbell of 35 to 36 Little Newport Street. An elegant little lodging, occupied by one of Roger's prostitutes, who was also his mistress. A small petite brunette, known as French Suzette. With menace and possibly murder on his mind, Max didn't draw any attention as he waited for the door to open. He didn't wear a disguise, just a grey suit, a dark overcoat, a shirt and a tie. As the black street door opened, Max removed his hat, his face clearly visible to those in this busy market street, as he knew no one who valued their life would dare to speak his name. Even on a street full of traders, he could appear and vanish like a gust of wind floating on the breeze. In his pockets, he didn't carry a weapon. No gun, no knife, no ligature. As being a well-built brute who was handy with his fists, he could easily crush a man's neck with 2 hands, and a woman's with just 1. Opened by Marcella, the prostitute's maid. This trembling help led him up the narrow staircase, past the closed club, and to the private room above to meet with French Suzette. In total, the Soho Strangler would murder 4 women, although his motive would remain a mystery. But was Red Max this maniac? Did a corrupt police force hide his crimes? Did an eager press distract the public with his lies? Did this crime boss order the murders of French Fifi, Marie Cotton and Dutch Leia to usurp any rivals and erase any informers? Or was this as simple as a once great white slaver who had fallen on hard times and was recouping his debts and exacting revenge, no matter how petty? Given enough power, money and control, surely it would take a criminal kingpin, someone like Max, to make a murder look like a suicide, to vanish any witness, to erase any evidence, to lead the police to collar a series of scapegoats, and to ensure that none of these murders ever went to criminal trial. Red Max, alias Mr Cohen, is the most likely suspect to be the Soho Strangler. And yet he wasn't. Only this wasn't corruption, a deception, or incompetence by the police. As before Marie Cotton and Dutch Leia were even murdered, Red Max was already dead. Part 8 of 10 of the Soho Strangler continues next week. Oh, fuck, that was a bugger. That was a bit of a bugger to record that one. Christ. Oh. Let's hope I can get the edit down and make it nice and light. Oh, Christ. I may have slightly overwritten it in places. Oh, sometimes I can whiz through it and go, oh, that was nice and easy. This one was not. I think because there's a lot of details in it, and oh, look at all that sunlight. I'm taking my pillows away from my window, which acts as my soundproofing. You often see footage of people going, oh, look at my amazing studio. Yep, I've a very cheap studio. See, you don't need much. You don't need all this fancy shit. You don't need all these mixing desks. You don't need 3 monitors. Fuck's sake, 3 monitors, Jesus. I've a laptop and 1 microphone with a little bit of sponge over the top of it. That's all you need. Fuck's sake. Ugh. Anyway, welcome to Extra Mile. Unscripted, unedited. I'm going to take your little hat off. There you go. Your hat is off. Oh, I'm not going to make a cup of tea because I've had about 50 today while I was trying to finish writing this. So I'm going to... Oh, yes. No popping on the kettle, which is all good. I'm having a da-da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da. There we go. I want you. Da-da-da-da. Oh, Diet Coke. The drug of choice. Until it gives you bloody Diet Coke headaches. Oh, and what's in this box? Belgian bun. Only one, because I ate some. I shoved it down my big fat cake hole and it was delicious. So, if you're new to Extra Mile, unscripted, this is the unscripted, unedited bit. We're going to do a quiz in a bit. I'll give you some extra details about the case. But first, normally we have a bit of a waffle. What's going on in the wonderful world of boaty life? Oh, it's bloody cold out. It's freezing outside. And my water filter is broken, which is really annoying under the sink. Luckily, I'm near a big water tap outside, but water filter is broken. I sheared off the other day. I took it into some chandleries where you can kind of buy boat stuff, and all of them stared at it and went, we've no idea what that is. So the thing I have is defunct. Apparently, it discontinued about 20 years ago. So annoying. So I've had to buy a new one, which I don't even know if it fits. Really annoying. And then it's cold, and I've been working really hard trying to get all these episodes done, and I missed 3 fuel boats going past with all the coal and stuff on board, so I've got no coal. So it's going to be sub-zero tonight, and I've got no coal on board. Oh, normally that never happens because I'm nice and organised, but not this time. I just keep missing them. They go by really slowly, but they don't let you know they're coming. They don't ring a bell. They just chug along like every other boat, and you look and you go, oh fuck, and they've gone. Oh, so yeah. Oh, bollocks. What else is going on? Oh yes, so this was probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago, but I did an interview with the wonderful Dom DeLargy of Soho Bites podcast. We were discussing the Soho Strangler, but also the film that came off the back of it. So 1940, I think I say 1942, but it's actually 41. There's a film called East of Piccadilly, which is based on the Soho Strangler murders. It's amazing. There's loads of films out there about the Jack the Ripper, but almost none about, in fact there's only one that we know of the Soho Strangler. It's tenuously linked as well. So I sat down with Dom. I recorded the bit about the Soho Strangler, and then he got Mel in and they discussed the film. So I've put a link in the show notes. Have a listen. Unfortunately, luckily Dom had it on his hard drive. We were in a pub one night, I think it was his January, and I just haven't, because I know he loves all the, he's like, because his podcast is all about films set. I'm going to use the word set in Soho, because as Dom rightly says, almost none of them are shot in Soho. They're meant to be, but they're not. And just because I knew I'd heard of East of Piccadilly, I just happened to say to him, "Have you ever heard of East of Piccadilly?" And he was like, "Yeah, I've got it on my hard drive, and I'm meant to be doing it for Soho Bites, but I haven't got round to it yet." And I was like, so I've watched it. It's an interesting film, but it's not worth you hunting out. It'll be a pig to find. But if you want to listen to that episode, there'll be a link in the show notes. Well done, Michael. I've got to remember to add that into the link afterwards. So yeah, do that. Belgian bun coming up, and a bit of Diet Coke. Lovely. So let's do some quiz questions, and then we'll dive into some extra stuff about this case. And then I'm going to have to go into Starbucks and edit the flip out of this episode. This is going to take ages. Question number 1. What newspaper is it said that the journalists of the infamous Dear Boss letter, which is in the era of Jack the Ripper, although here I've written Jack the Riper. What newspaper is it said that journalists of the infamous Dear Boss letter worked at? That's not even a good sentence, that one. You know what I mean. Question number 2. What country was Max born in? Question number 3. What was Max's birth name? Question number 4. What wounds did Max have to his face and body? Question number 5. What part of Paris did he run a brothel? Question number 6. Under what alias was Max deported from France? Question number 7. In which Belgian city, Belgian buns, in which Belgian city did Max run a cafe and his initial sex trade empire? Question number 8. On what street did Max live? Question number 9. What kind of dog did Max have? Can you remember that one? And question number 10. What job did the husband of French Suzette? What job did the husband of French Suzette, real name Suzanne Bertrand, who's mentioned at the end, fuck's sake. So, French Suzette, alias Suzanne Bertrand. What job did her husband do? There we go. That's better. So that's her husband, not her pimp, not her boyfriend, Roger Vernon. So, let's dive into some stuff about this. Don't forget, I haven't edited this yet, so I might balls up some of these questions. I don't edit this thing, this extra mark. What's the point? No, this is just, that's the whole point. It's not meant to be edited. So if I do ball something up, there we go. It happens. So Max, his aliases. I spent months going through the police files, years in researching this, and even on my original walks I used to do on Murder Mile, I put in about Roger Vernon and Red Max Cassell in there, but I was doing the kind of tabloid version of kind of how it was represented. This is entirely different. This is exactly what it is. This is as it was presented at the time to the police. So we're diving into this. We're diving into Red Max, potentially as the Strangler. But of course, he wasn't the Strangler. This is. I wrote it in big notes in my little diary here. I have a Bible, and I have all of my notes like it's. This episode alone is 106 pages long. There you go. They're just my notes to keep me on target and make sure I have not everything that goes in. But with Max, it was only when I was going through the original police files that I saw that locally in and around Soho he was known as Mr Cohen. Now, it could be that he was the Mr Cohen with reference to Marie Cotton. It could be, but interestingly with the press, we only know that he's called Mr Cohen because of Dorothy Neary, who was the Marie Cotton's lodger, the prostitute. Now, the press, I didn't put this in the episode because I just thought we've already kind of covered this, the fact that the press are mangling all the details. The press called him Harry Cohen. His name wasn't Harry Cohen. There was a guy who worked at James Allen Hall's premises called Harry Cohen, and I think they either took the name Harry Cohen as in the big kind of movie producer, or they assumed it was Harry Cohen, or they mistook him for the other Harry Cohen who worked at James Allen Hall's place of residence. But when I went through the Dorothy's original statements, she says Cohen. She never says Harry Cohen. She just says Mr. Cohen, because she only heard it once, and that's all she heard. So it's interesting. He could be the Mr. Cohen, but I had to keep it really discreet on here, because obviously, as the timeline goes, you've got French Fifi murdered start November 1935. Then the way I presented it in this series is that we go to Marie Cotton in April 1936. Then we got 3 weeks afterwards, you've got Dutch Leia May 1936. But Red Max was murdered January 1936. So he couldn't have committed those murders at all. I mean, the press did make connections between him and Fifi, but it was all very tenuous. It was like she was under the protection of Red Max. But this is the whole point about the sex trade. There's nothing written down. There's no contracts. They don't keep a list of all their prostitutes, so the police can turn up and go, "Oh, can we have a look at your list of prostitutes?" And they go, "Yeah, here you are, officer. Have a look." It doesn't exist. Everything's in code, or they don't have it written down, because therefore they can't get arrested for living off of moral earnings. So the press were just making up bullshit, all kind of hearsay and shit like that. So they could have been connected. He could have known them. It's likely, given the fact that he worked in the sex trade, that he would have known most of the full-time prostitutes. Don't forget, as we mentioned in this quite a lot, there's a real difference between kind of full-time prostitution, casual prostitution, or just kind of, when women are going through difficult times, going out, picking up men who pay for their drinks, their meals, hotel room, and in return they feel that they've got to put out. That's kind of prostitution in its own, that's kind of more what they say is casual prostitution. So Max, multitude of aliases in there. Max Le Roquin, which is Max the Ginger, or Max the Redhead, depending on what way you put it across. He wasn't fully redhead, he was kind of fairish with a reddish mop. Also known as Max the Red, and Russian Max. There's a lot of confusion there. People seem to think he was a communist. He technically, I need to be careful now, because I almost gave away a quiz question. Where he lived was technically Russia, but now it is not Russia. So he had multiple names. I need to make sure I don't say that one, because that's one of the quiz questions. One of them was Max Kassenberg, various spellings of that. Emile Allard, which was the French-Canadian passport he got. We're going to dive into more of that next week, because we've got another interesting suspect that we're going to dive into. I need to be careful that I don't give away too much about next week's episode, but that leads us down another path of the whole French-Canadian thing, because back then Canada was part of Britain. Therefore, because he would classify himself as French-Canadian, therefore he would have access to Canada, he would have access to France and Britain as well. So that's kind of why a lot of people did that. He also used the alias of Königsfest, which apparently was his mother's maiden name. Red Max is a nightmare to track down. He really is. That's why I've got 2 dates of birth for him. They're the 2 nearest that I can get. Unfortunately, even on his police records, I got some of his police records from France, but even with those, because there's not a database, there's no one sitting there on a computer going bleep, 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 bleep. Literally, they have to rely on the information that they have and the information that he gives them. So he can give them an alias, he can give them a false date of birth, he could just turn around and go, wow, sorry about that, I didn't realise. So, yeah. So in there is all his aliases, but he was known as Mr. Cohen locally. Ooh. His sister Fanny lived locally. She lived in Golders Green. His father was either called Hyman or Herman. There's 2 different versions, so I'll put both of them in there. His nephew, Alfred Brahman, not Brahman, who is Dorothy Neary's boyfriend, the man who kept her similar name, but not the same one. He also lived in Golders Green. Didn't seem to know. Well, he said he didn't seem to know a lot about, as he called him, my uncle Emile Allard. So even his own uncle, he referred to his uncle as Uncle Emile Allard, which was his fake name. That was the one he got via the legal passport. We don't know if there was a real Emile Allard who he took the passport from, probably someone who had died, or whether it was just a name he made up. Max also had a brother. Details seem to say that he was an invalid living in Paris, but when I dived into the details about that, it appears that just before the, I've got to be so careful, the culmination of this episode, Max's brother was stabbed in an affray in Paris. It's going to be so easy when I do this with the Soho Strangler nuggets. When we do that week of all the details, I don't have to worry about giving away spoilers. So everyone seemed to know him as Max. As mentioned, he was a Polish Jew. So do you know, Marie Cotton was fearful of a man who was big, who was terrifying, who physically she found very terrifying. He was Jewish. He went by the name Cohen. Could be about billion Cohen. Well, not billion, obviously. A load of Cohens in the London area. Was it him? We don't know. She gave away nothing. She didn't tell Carlo about it, so we don't know. He's 16 stone, 170 centimetres tall, which is about 5'5". Some people say 5'7". He had a mop of fair reddish hair, brown eyes, a marked furrow under his chin. He had some wounds, which are questions. So one of the quiz questions, so I can't tell you about that. See, these quiz questions make it really annoying. He was always well dressed, very well presented. If you're a patron subscriber, you'll see we've got photos of Max over time, so they're really interesting to see. In one of them, he actually looks like the devil. He's always well presented. He always liked to represent his wealth. He wore a flash suit, a big overcoat, shirt and tie, a grey trilby, and lots of gold jewellery reflecting his wealth. Because, of course, lots of tosspots who always love to be dripping in gold jewellery, and they're normally the arseholes you just think you haven't worked a day in your life. Police report states that he was offensive, arrogant. He we'll dive into more about this next week, but he pretty much kept to himself. He lived alone with his little doggy. A violent man, very much a bully. He didn't seem to have many friends, but it depends whether I do it in the next episode or not at all. He seemed to be stealing from his friends, conning them. He didn't have a lot of people around him who trusted. I think he got to the point where he was big and powerful and he could get away with whatever he wanted. But when his world started to collapse, everyone who was around him, who was fearful of him, just walked away. Joe, he was rude to people. He was insulting. He was quick-tempered. He was handy with his fists, with knives, guns. But he often cheated associates out of their money, and it is said that he was potentially what's the word I used earlier on? A police informer. Obviously, there's nothing about that in the police files, but of course there wouldn't be, would there? What else we got? So he started off pretty young, as far as we know. He came from a Jewish family. We don't know what his father did, but he trained as a bootmaker when he was a young boy. He got into petty criminality early and learned to use aliases as covers. Around 1900, he was in Paris. He was running a bootmaking business and used that to hide his crimes. This is what he used throughout. So even when he was in London, he was pretending to be kind of what he used to do, he would, as mentioned in the episode, he would carry a little magnifying glass around him, and business cards that would say he's a West London jeweller. But really, what he would do is go to Debenhams on Longacre in Covent Garden. He'd go in, he'd buy some really cheap, crappy jewellery, and then he'd go into kind of pubs and clubs and sell them off there. So he wouldn't make any money off it, but at least he could say, people in places would go, "Oh yeah, that's he's just a jeweller." But that was kind of his cover to make sure that the police weren't like, "Oh, where does he get his money from?" They just go, "Oh, he's just a low time jeweler, when really he was kind of a big time blokey. His criminal record isn't available. It wasn't in the police files. As you'll learn next week, it was really hard because next week's episode takes us really deep into kind of Paris and Canada. It takes us a long way. So unfortunately, his criminal record isn't there. I've only got fragments of it. But we know he dealt in stolen goods, drugs, prostitution, white slavery, and had violence against his prostitutes. 24th of October 1902, he was sentenced in Paris for a vagabondage special, which is apparently wandering abroad and selling drugs, and he served an unspecified amount of time in prison. October 1903, he was expelled from France. What else have we got? He moved around a lot. I mean, he moved to Buenos Aires and lived in a house of a man named Kajan Mardos, and he was noted as having lived with prostitutes and lived off their earnings. This seems to be his thing. Whenever he gets booted out, he moves somewhere else, he gets a new alias, he comes back, he sets up places elsewhere. It's like prostitution is in every country. There's not a single town in this country where there's not prostitution. So, wherever he goes, he can set up something new. He was expelled from France. He was expelled from Belgium. He was in London, in Soho, supposedly running Soho's Iron Gang, although this is we're unable to verify this, but then again, it's criminality. As I mentioned, they don't really write it down. Gangs don't go, oh yeah, you are part of my gang. Big gap in his history, kind of 1914 to 1920. There's nothing there. We don't know where he is. We know he got his passport in and around that moment, but as we'll find out. We know what happened to that next week. April 1920, he was back in Antwerp, this time living off a Belgian passport, again possibly fake, living off the proceeds of prostitution, and he was expelled November 1920, and it's there he came to London briefly. 1926, he applied for permission to live in Paris, even though he'd been expelled, to work as a shoe merchant, and he lived there under the name of Max Meyer Cassel. He stated that he was living in London at that time at 152 Shaftesbury Avenue, so he clearly has connections to London by that point. Don't forget he's part of the London gang in Soho prior to that, so he already knows this area well. And it's hard for them to prove that he's living on Shaftesbury Avenue, or said he was. And of course, his family may have already moved here by that point. Big gap between there and early 1930s. We know he was doing the same kind of scheme where he was running prostitutes from South America to Europe. He'd already started doing the same in Canada and Australia, and obtaining British nationality for Canadian women and Australian women to kind of come to Britain, and likewise. So some British prostitutes he was shipping out there as well. In 1933, he was sentenced in France for transporting a girl to Brazil. He was charged with white slavery and drug dealing, but he didn't, as far as we know, he didn't go to prison for that. He may have been sentenced in his absentia, but yeah, he didn't go to prison for that. 1933, he came back to Britain, and he's shuttling by this point. So he's got a little flat in London, he's got a little flat in Paris, he's got a little flat in Brussels, and he's shuttling between the three, but he doesn't seem to stay around for very long. As mentioned, he's got no convictions in the UK. He's got his legal jobs. We know where he liked to hang out. He hung out in the Gay Adventurer on Dean Street, a European restaurant under Sam's Club on Little Pulteney Street, which is now Brewer Street, which is where Dutch Lair lived. Also at the Café Royal, Lyons Corner House Tea Room on Marble Arch, which is where the Blackout Ripper picked up his first victim, and he regularly visited a French Ponce's house at 5 Old Compton Street, which only by comparing all the files did I work out that this was where, same year, that Dutch Lair had a wedding reception with Robert Smith. Not Robert Smith from The Cure, obviously. His flat in Marylebone It was small, it was low-key, he lived there with his little doggy, a little bit of furniture, but it wasn't anything extravagant. I think because of the fact that he didn't really live there that much, but also nearer the later part of where we got to in this episode, he didn't have a lot of money going on. He did have a safety box at Pall Mall Deposits, where they found about £100, which was about £9,000 today. So he had money hidden away. We just don't know why he was kind of going after all these little pieces of money here and there. Shall I do this? I may stop here. Only because I haven't written next week's episode. Because I write and then edit, and then I write and edit, and I do it that way. And I just don't... Still got a lot to say about Max. So, yeah. Ooh, look, that's good timing. Someone has started doing some mowing or something. So, you know what I'm like when I'm trying to record this and some fucker is mowing. Oh, dear. I think that is it. Oh, one thing that I didn't put in the episode, but while I was researching, around the same time, actually it'd be later, Sir Robert A. Johnson, Deputy Master of Controller of the Royal Mint, where all Britain's money comes from, died at a luxury flat in Lower John Street in Soho, home of Millie Arlette, a remarkable, beautiful young woman who arrived in England from France several months ago. Sir Robert was said to be an old friend of hers, and he died March 1938. Now, when I went searching for this, because I thought, there's a nice connection between kind of French prostitutes and kind of people in high places. Almost all the information, all the evidence about this has been removed, because obviously he's quite a big associate. He's quite a big important guy. Even on his Wikipedia page, which is not a reliable source of information, it says when he died, but he doesn't say that he died in the flat of a French prostitute who'd been shipped in the country by French ponces just a few months before. Yeah. What else we got? I think that's it. Yeah. Let's end that. So anyway, hope you enjoyed that episode. Another cliffhanger. With all the other episodes, what normally we do is we follow a very logical route, and we go, it's this guy, and we follow how he does this and that. But because this has been a mystery for 80 plus years, there's a lot to uncover on this. So we've still got a long way to go. We're trying to follow how the police resolve it, who they pick as potential suspects, the evidence, what's there, what's real, what's not, we've already gone through how the press have kind of manipulated things that shouldn't be manipulated with, like witness statements, details. They should just put it out as it is, as they do in the first two murders. But when it came to Dutch Layer, they started fucking around with it because they're idiots and they want to make more money for the newspaper and make a name for themselves. So yeah, I think potentially Red Max could have been like a key suspect in this, but he was dead. So let's do the quiz questions, and then I'll have another slurp of Diet Coke. Question number 1: what newspaper is it said that the journalists of the infamous Dear Boss letter worked at? It was The Star, which is a tabloid. Ooh, tabloid newspapers, brilliant. Question number 2. What country was Max born in? It was... So I was just checking that I was still recording. What country was Max born in? It was Latvia, which was then part of Russia. Question number 3. What was Max's birth name? It was Maya Cassell. Question number 4, what wounds did Max have to his face and body? He had a broken nose, lost teeth, and on his left cheek and neck he was slashed in a knife fight. But also 2 weeks before the murder he'd cut his finger in a knife fight. Question number 5, what part of Paris did he run a brothel? It was Rue Pigalle. Question number 6, under what alias was Max deported from France? It was under the name of Kem Festi. Question number 6. In which Belgian city, Belgian buns, in which Belgian city did Max run a cafe and the beginnings of his sex trade empire? It was Antwerp. Question number 8. On what street did Max live? Well, I gave that away, didn't I? James Street. Question number 9. What kind of dog did Max have? It was a white Highland Terrier. And question number 10. What job... Oh, here we go. Suzanne. Question number 10. French Suzette. Suzanne Bertrand, alias French Suzette. What job did her husband do? Her husband, Emile Bertrand, was a violin maker. Fuck's sake, there we go. That's that done. So that's me done. 3 more episodes to go, and I think it's going to kill me. I am knackered already. But there we go. I hope you're enjoying it. I hope it's all coming together and you go, ooh, lots of mystery. Ooh. So have yourself a good week, folks. Stay safe and be good. Thank you for supporting the podcast. Oh no, I think I'm done. Lots of love, everyone. Thank you very much.